Morning church. It's always an honor and a privilege to be able to stand up here and bring a word on a Sunday. We've had quite a hectic start to our year this year. We were actually away for the first 3 of the 4 weekends in January. It was all really cool things. We were in Mkuzi for a bit, and then Hlui, and then we swam Midmar. So it's been a busy start, and I've been super excited just to be home the last couple of weekends and not really going much further than a morning run from my house. But the consequence of that is that we missed the first start of Greg's preaching on discipleship. And we were back last week, and I listened to that part 3, and I thought, sure, I better go and just catch up on the first 2 sessions, because I felt it was really powerful. And as I was listening to it, it got me excited, because over this time I'd been thinking and prepping on what I wanted to bring, and it tied very nicely into what Greg has been preaching. So the topic that I want to preach on today is community. And Greg has already touched quite a lot on how community is used as a method of discipleship. So I'm hoping today that we can just dig in a little bit more deeply and spend a bit more emphasis on community. I know that community can be quite a scary topic for some people. It requires us being vulnerable, and people, there's been hurt that's happened in both outside communities and within the church. So I know that this can be, for some, quite a difficult topic, but it is, I believe, such an important and vital one. That we really, really need it in our lives, and it's one of the most important ways that we live out our Christian faith. So, we just have to, I always think it's good to look at Jesus as an example of how to live. And if we look in the Gospel of Luke, for example, it's often said that Jesus is either going to a meal, at a meal, or going from a meal throughout that Gospel. And if you look at it, it's like almost every second chapter he's at someone's house eating food. And it's just that's just a reflection of how Jesus lived his life. He lived his life within community. He walked with his disciples. He was in the hurts. He was in the pain. He walked life with them. He was not a aloof God. He wasn't a sage that stayed away on a mountaintop. He was somebody who was part of community. And Greg's been talking about us being followers of the way of Jesus. And if we're going to be following the way that Jesus lived his life, it needs to be a life that reflects that and that aspect of it as one that's in community. So the practical side of me wants to break this down into 3 questions that sort of wraps this up. And what I want to ask today is why, first of all, why do we need community? What does that look like for us as a church? And then how do we live that out practically in real life? Okay, so if we start off with why. Why do we need community? So we've been designed to live in community. That is the way that God has made us. And the incredible part of the plan for God is that as we live in community, we become formed to be more like him and more like we've been designed. They work so very well together. If this human called Brett came with an instruction manual, the opening page would be like God, or aim to be like God. Because as we aim to be like him, we live the most joyful, the freest, and the most fulfilling life that we can. So I just want to start right at the start of the Bible in Genesis 1:26. God said, "Let us make human beings in our image to be like us." We have been designed by God to be like him. And one of the things that we can skip over when we hear that message is that small little word, our. So our is it's a little collective noun that points to God being a holy trinity. So God, he's not existing by himself. He's part of a holy trinity, and that trinity reflects perfect love, friendship, and community. It's often said that God is a God of love, but love cannot exist in a vacuum. It has to have community that it is directed towards. So God's very being is one of love and community, and we've been made in his image to be like him. So if we are aiming towards God, we're aiming towards a God that is a God of love and community. We obviously live, I'm going to take a step back here. We have been designed to be like God. God is a God of community. So the fullest way for us to live our life is in a reflection of that. But obviously we are not living in a perfect world, and we are fallen, and we don't have the perfect Holy Trinity, but we do have our imperfect church here. And the beauty of God's plan is that as we live out our lives in community, it forms us to be more like him. It's through walking with people that we are formed to be like God, and our community slowly starts to reflect that perfect ideal as well. So the next verse I wanted to look at was 1 John 4:11-12, and it said, "Beloved, if God so loved us, we ought also to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God abides in us, and his love is perfected in us." And it's that last little part of the verse that I wanted to just focus on. We live out God's love into our communities by the joyful, sometimes complicated, painful walk with others. And it's through walking with those around us that he begins to shape us, and his love is perfected in us. We have to be with others. We can't do this alone. The fruits of the Spirit are also, it would be ideal if one day we got saved and suddenly the fruits of the Spirit were reflected in all of our lives. That's just not the case. It's something we all struggle with as we mature in this walk. And we grow in patience through having to be in situations where we are dealing with impatient people. We grow in goodness when we are able to look past a hurt that someone brought towards us. We grow in kindness when there's opportunities for us to practice kindness, and we can't do this alone. The fruits of the Spirit grow in us as we walk out our lives together with others. There's a nice analogy that I think sums it up quite nicely, and that is to see the Lord as a shepherd and us as a sheep. So that's an analogy that's used quite commonly throughout the scriptures. And I've been fortunate enough to be in a sheep farm on the Karoo quite recently and quite a few times. And so when I picture this image, it's of this big open space, big skies, the sheep are spread out over this whole paddock. And the shepherd comes and he calls to the sheep, and they start coming towards him. And as they get closer to the shepherd, they also get closer to each other. And that's an image for us as a community. As we strive towards God, we are brought closer to each other. And the reverse is just as true. As we get closer to each other and walk with each other, we're going to be perfected, and we're going to look more, we get closer to God. So it's an image of why we need community is to be formed to be more like him. Okay. So the next question that I wanted to get onto was why. Oh, sorry, that was why. What? What does community look like? This is both, I find this part super hopeful, but also very challenging. So I'm going to read from Hebrews 12:28 to 13 verse 2. And it says, "Since we are receiving a kingdom that is unshakable, let us be thankful and please God by worshipping with our holy fear and awe. For our God is a devouring fire." And this is the part that becomes important to us. "Keep on loving each other as brothers and sisters. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for some who have done this have entertained angels without realizing it." And I think it's quite clear there what our community is meant to look like. We are meant to love each other as brothers and sisters. This is meant to be a family. I find that super hopeful because this is what a lot of the world needs. We have a world that's becoming more individualistic. People are looking for acceptance, they're looking for love, and the church is meant to be a family where they can find all of that. but it's incredibly challenging in the intensity of it, because a family relationship is not something that we can just opt in and out of. We can't just cancel it like we would a streaming service. It's something that we are committed to. It's something, just if you think of your own relationships with your families, it's with your brothers and your sisters and your mothers and your fathers. It's a complex relationship. They've seen you in your absolute best. They've seen you in your absolute worst. They know you inside and out. They know what drives you up the wall. They walk with you every day through every little daily life. And it's not just a simple relationship. It's one of the most complex and familial relationships that we have. So that is what we are called to as a family, and that is a radical intensity, both back in biblical times and now. It's something that requires commitment. It's something that requires accountability. It's not an easy relationship at times. And as the hopeful part of that is that it's within that family that we are really shaped. And I think, as I've just gotten married relatively recently, and yes, thank you, I appreciate that. And I'm not qualified to talk about marriage, but one thing that it has brought up to me is that it just has revealed how powerfully our families have shaped who we are. Because when you grow up, you just do something the way that it's always been done. You've been shaped to see something in a certain way because of the family that you've grown up with. And when you're in marriage, it's sort of like a mirror is suddenly lifted up, and you can start to see all the ways that you just took for granted that you did something. And it's just highlighted to me the way in which family shapes us. So that's the hope of this family in Christ, because it can be the most powerful thing that shapes us towards God. It's not something light and fluffy. It can be a powerful, powerful way in which we grow closer to Him. And we're not meant to have a community that is just a Christian club. It's not meant to be something where we live separate lives and come on a Sunday. It's meant to be a family. So I've been listening to a lot of Tim Keller and prepping for this, and when he sort of speaks about a Christian club versus a family, he often uses a birding club as his example. But I'm sort of getting closer to 30 now, and as that happens, you start getting into running, you sign up for a marathon, and you start getting into birding. So I really enjoy birding. I think it's quite awesome. So I don't want to use a birding club as the example here, but I still want to make it relatable and fun. So my second sort of hobby that is a mark of my maturity is ballroom dancing, which I've also gotten into. So so it's with my family, so it's fine. It's really a lot of fun. We've tried to get a lot of our friends to join. Only Stacey and Late have taken up the offer. But if I was at a dancing lesson and someone came up to me and told me no, Brett, you need to change the way that you live your life, it would be, first I'd be quite shocked. And I'd say, no, just let me try keep my slow, quick, slow count here. I'm just here to dance. And it's a funny story, but it highlights the difference between what a club and what a family is. At a club, there's no accountability, there's no commitment. We aren't walking in each other's lives. A family is one where we are walking with each other. There's accountability, there's commitment. And through that, when we are walking in that, we have the power and the freedom and all the awesome parts of family that come along with it, the unconditional love, the support, the acceptance. So it's just a way to show the power that family has, and it really does become something that can shape us into being more like Christ. Now, at this point, I've been talking a lot about a family as within the church, but that verse doesn't stop there just at love your brothers and sisters. It continues to say, don't forget to show hospitality to strangers. For some who have done this have entertained angels without living it. And you'll read that verse and you go, okay, cool, great, I'll be nice and kind to strangers. I'll be welcoming to someone who arrives to the door on a Sunday. And we sort of skip over that verse. And we miss the intensity of it. So the Greek word there, I'm not quite qualified to speak on all of it, but the Greek word for hospitality to strangers can also be translated as love for strangers. So in the verse before, we meant to have an intense love for our brothers and sisters that's focused towards inside our community. The next verse goes on, we have to have that same intensity and love, but focused outside to those around us, to the cities that we're in, to the communities that we found that are outside of our church. So we're called to both have an intense love for those within and for those without. And sure, this is quite hard. I mean, this is not easy to do. I think you can often think of an example of a friendship group or someone who's been journeying for a long time together, and they have a group that is very close and very intense, but it's hard to break into. It's hard to get into that sort of group. And on the other hand, you have groups that are very open and very welcoming, and they're very easy to get into, but it lacks that intensity. And the church is called to be one that is both close and intense and accountable, but also very open and welcoming and non-judgmental. We cannot have only the close inside love without the love for outsiders or for the strangers. It's hard. How do we create a community that is both sticky and intense and robust and full of sacrificial love and accountability, whilst also being open and non-judgmental and welcoming to strangers? So that gives me to my last point, is the how. And this one, my answer is always, when I start to dig into how do we do this, it kind of comes back to always the same thing, and it's Jesus is always the answer. And I know that sometimes can sound like quite a trite response, but we can't do this by ourselves. We're called to create a family and a community that is way beyond what exists in our own families. So it's something we can't do by ourselves, and we need God's grace as the engine that powers all of this. We cannot do it in our own strengths. I take a lot of comfort from the next verse. So if you just continue reading in Hebrews 13, in verse 5 it says, God says, I'll never fail you and I'll never abandon you. So he is the one who's standing with us as we try to do all of this. Like when we feel vulnerable or are rejected by someone within our community, we have the comfort and the surety that God is with us. He'll never leave us. He'll never forsake us. And when we're looking for the strength to just open up our home on a Thursday night when we're feeling tired and all you want to do is go to bed, it's God is with us. He'll never fail. He'll never fail us. He'll never forsake us. He'll never abandon us. And we have to build that surety into the very center of it. It's always God at the very center of it that empowers us to move out and to bring others in. But in saying that, it doesn't just happen on the same token. God is the center of it, but we can't have community unless we're in it. It doesn't just pop into existence, and it requires sacrifice. It limits what we can do with our time and attention. Like, we have a home group on a Wednesday night, and that means that my Wednesday nights no longer belong just to me. They belong to the home group as well. And we have church on Sundays, I was away the first 3 weeks of the month. But if it means that I'm here on a Sunday, it limits our time, what we can do with our time and attention. It requires sacrifice. It requires walking through messy conflict resolution with people in our families and in our church and our communities. It's a lot easier to just pull back and step away, or to try and fit church and fit church life into our schedules and do it as is convenient to us. But then we miss out on all the the goodness of it. We have to be committed and accountable and inside the community. And that is hard sometimes, and it requires sacrifice. But one of the images that was used to sort of explain the beauty of it, it came from a writer called G.K. Chesterton. And he describes life and sort of Christian discipline and community. And the image that he uses is a cliff face with children playing on top of it. And I always, when I picture this, I picture like that English cliffside that's very stark, and then this green field on the top and a stark drop-off. And there's children playing a game, let's call it a game of soccer, on the top, right against the cliff face. And community is a fence line that runs against the cliff. So whilst you can see the fence line as something that's limiting and limiting your freedom, within that, with that fence up, the children can play exuberantly. There's nothing hindering them from being able to enjoy that game to the fullest. There's safety and security with that up. But as soon as you take that fence line down, now suddenly there's a little bit of reservedness. You have to be a little bit more careful. You cannot have the same exuberance and freedom to enjoy the game that you had before. So that's the way that I see this community that we are called to be in. From the outside, it can look like something that is limiting, that brings down our freedom, that brings our time down into our free time into smaller portions. And we are now accountable to more people, and we are committed to something that is bigger than us. But in that, we now have the freedom to really enjoy life. And it brings so much freedom and joy. So that is the way that I picture our community. It's not something that's limiting. It's something that lets us enjoy life to the fullest. So some final practical ways on how we can live out community. First one is join a community group. It costs you one weeknight a week, and the life we've been running one for a while now, and it's been such a blessing. And it really is. It's in small groups that we can really begin to build into each other's life. So there's a bunch on the notice board. Speak to some of the elders afterwards if you want to be involved. Speak to Ntombi. They'll find a community group. If you want to start one, chat to Greg and Names, or if you feel that's on your heart, but get involved. Don't let church just be a Sunday event. The second thing we can do is join a serving team. Everyone who's part of a family helps out. I'm sure in your own family you clean the floors or wash the dishes or take the trash out. We're called to, this is our family, this is our community, help out, join in. Those who serve together stay together. So join a serving team. And then we're also called to focus outwards. So invite someone into your home. I'm sure everyone has a person or a family or a friend or someone who they've just been thinking, I need to try and connect with them. To take that step and bring them into your home. If you live in an apartment block, I'm sure there's neighbors that you walk past very regularly who why don't you have them over for dinner? It's a small step, and it doesn't cost a lot, but it is a way of extending ourselves outward. So, I hope in summary of this whole long talk thank you. But on community it's such an important part of our walk with God. It's really something that shapes us into who He wants us to be. And it helps form us into being more like Him. And yes, it does require sacrifice, and it does require commitment, and you are probably going to be hurt by those in your community at some point. But it's through walking that out that we really are shaped to be more like God. So thank you.